but if you move to the bottom left, 68% of all males in state and federal prison do not have a high school diploma. So we know that when our schools fail our kids, for many of them, the next step, the next place they end up is incarceration. And so I just want to frame what we're talking about here today in that context, that we have to do better by our kids, and that all the connections that are being made here between how we treat our kids in schools and what we're preparing many of them for based on race and class are utterly unacceptable and to be counter to the founding principles of this country. There's a lot of information here. I'm going to move on. I'll make sure you get this graphic later. Before I get into history, I just want to say one thing about language. We talk in this country a lot about the achievement gap and what we need to do to get those kids to do better. And Gloria Ladson-Billings is a teacher educator, and she has a really phenomenal framing, which is that it's not the achievement gap, it's the education debt. It's the historical debt that is owed to different groups of people of color, working class and poor groups of people who have been exploited historically throughout the history of this country, and that their wealth, their education, their ability to make decisions for their students' education was taken from them for centuries. And so when we look at the achievement gap, what we're really looking at is the impact of the accumulation of that debt of what is owed to those communities. And I really like that framing because it's an education debt. It's what I owe people and what I need to be doing as a teacher to make sure is being repaid versus why is this kid not doing better in my class. And I wanted to have that framing out at the beginning to think about all the ways that we even frame the problem that puts it back on the kids versus putting it back on us. So I'm going to walk us through 400 years of history in about 40 minutes. It's going to go pretty fast. So please feel free to get coffee if you need it, get food, stand up, move around. I have a lot of experience working with students with special needs, so if you need to move or do other stuff, that's totally normal for me, and I get that, and that's great. I want to just give a few tips of some ways to listen to history. Most of us, I think, had some pretty boring history classes in our lives. Hopefully this won't be another one. The first is that when we look at history, when we look at laws, we need to remember laws are only ever made to stop people from doing things they're already doing, right? I live in Massachusetts where you can't sell liquor on Sunday mornings. That's not because people didn't want people to come to work on Sunday mornings, it's because people were getting drunk on Sunday mornings in the public square and lying around and vomiting. So they had to make a law to stop people from doing that. So when we look at history, the laws are to stop things that are already happening. That resistance is a response to rules, spoken or unspoken, that one group exerts on another. And so in this presentation of history, I wanted to make sure we had some models of resistance along the way so that we remember people have always been trying to improve education and make it better, and that we can learn from those. To pay attention who's missing and ask why. I had to be pretty selective in the history that I was pulling together for the short time span and try to be inclusive, but there are voices that are missing from this, and thinking about why are those voices so often missing from our narratives in education. And then to listen for the messages that are becoming explicitly and implicitly. A law is an explicit message. A lot of the resistance we're going to look at were all the implicit messages that different groups of people got about how much their kids were worthy of education or how possible it was to educate them. We don't need to hear my voice all this morning. Are there 2 or 3 people who would like to be readers for me where I can give you a mic and you can read some of the slides that are going to come up so we can all hear them? 1, 2, okay, 1 more? 3, thank you. I think there's 1 more mic out there. Thank you. So maybe if we just want to do this 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, kind of take turns that way reading them. You'll start.
100,000 to 60,000 years ago, first peoples inhabit Western Hemisphere, according to indigenous scholars. White scholars put this date at 12,000 years ago.
So just think about that difference of timing and how you understand yourself and how long you have been here and who gets to claim whose history.
4,500 BCE to present, Mohican, Minisk, Mohegan, Pequot, Nickel, and Cherokee peoples live on and tend to the land that is currently called Connecticut.
1614, 1633, 1614, Dutch sailor travels up Connecticut River. 1633, Dutch set up the fort and church on the land that is currently known as Hartford.
Right, so a military base and a religious base. That's the founding of Connecticut.
1619, the first enslaved Africans are brought to the British colony of Virginia, current U.S. Commonwealth of Virginia.
Captain John Mason leads colonists to victory in war with the Pequots and expands the European colonization of what is currently known as Connecticut.
1638, Thomas Hooker founds the Latin school to educate white young men in Greek and Latin in preparation for entering the ministry.
And so in colonial America, the way that you communicated laws, the ways the colonial power enforced its control over people was through the church. The ministers and pastors were the ones who would hand down the new orders, would hand down the new laws, would make sure that people were following them and exerted that power. And so when we look at education here, the founding is as a colonial tool of power. We're all noticing the whiteness in here too, right?
Yes.
All right.
1646, William Plain is executed in New Haven for having had sex with another man. Several more men will be executed in CT over the next century until the punishment for gay sex becomes life imprisonment.
1666. In May 1666, the Connecticut colony adopts county government and establishes 4 counties: Fairfield, Hartford, New Haven, and New London, with 4 others added in 1785. The county governments operate jails and courts, give out liquor licenses, and deal with highway and boundary disagreements between towns.
1701, Connecticut colony passes an act for the liberty to erect a collegiate school, hoping to create an institution wherein youth may be instructed in the arts and sciences who, through the blessing of Almighty God, may be fitted for employment in both church and civil state. It enrolls only white men who can afford tuition.
So this is the precursor to Yale, which later gets its money to become a larger institution based on investments in the Indian trading company and the colonization of the Indian subcontinent.
1779, Thomas Jefferson proposes a 2-track educational system with different tracks, in his words, for the laboring and the learned. Scholarship would allow very few of the laboring class to advance, Jefferson says, by raking a few geniuses from the rubbish.
So this next slide is about Pennsylvania. There's going to be a few slides in here about Pennsylvania and New York initially because they were the seat of colonial power before our country came into being a country and set a lot of the direction for policies. Later, Texas and California will show up as the 2 states that have the biggest control over curriculum in the textbook industry.
1790. Pennsylvania's state constitution calls for free public education, but only for poor children. It is expected that rich people will pay for their children's schooling.
All right. Origin of inequity in public education funding. So at your tables, just take a moment, and my readers, please hang on to your microphones. Thank you. What are your reactions just to this little